Dear citizens, I'm Padmini Arhant, author and presenter, padminiarhant.com, prakriti.padminiarhant.com, representing the divinity. I welcome you all to the topic Russia Ukraine Peace Agreement. The latest development between Ukraine government and pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine reaching an agreement to preserve ceasefire is a welcoming gesture for all citizens in eastern and western Ukraine as one nation. The ceasefire also provides relief to neighboring Russia as well as Eastern Europe. As for the standoff between Russia and the Western counterparts, that is, the European Union and the United States in particular, the NATO expansion near and around Russia is obviously the bone of contention for the Russian Federation. No nation in the modern age should either pose any threat or be threatened by any other nation, individually or collectively, near or far. Russia's concern with NATO presence at the doorstep as a direct security problem is not unreasonable. The revival of Cold War tensions prompting all sides on eternal alert with military readiness, not barring nuclear alarm, is not the choice in the contemporary era or in the future. There is an urgency to reverse situation to normal. The major nuclear powers, that is, the United States and allies, together with Russia's unanimous acknowledgement to shift from military position to active, fruitful diplomacy, is the need of the hour from several dimensions, namely the regional and global security standpoint, preventing unnecessary loss of civilian and defense personnel precious lives, and averting serious economic liability in the prolonged standoff. The Western maneuver to surround Russia with NATO forces, impetus, Russian defense mechanism, and other military strategy to protect territorial integrity as sovereign right. Simultaneously, Russia's troop deployment and military assets across Ukraine and Russia border, including the northern side on Belarus, sends a wrong message contradictory to Russia's public statement on the political decision to de-escalate situation. Russia's military troops distribution around Ukraine in the aftermath of Russian and Western representatives' unsuccessful meeting on NATO withdrawal from Russian boundary and Eastern Bloc creates undesirable predicament for the citizens in Ukraine and Russia. The civilian and armed forces on both sides are forced into conflation, adding complexity to the otherwise containable crisis. There is a requirement on all sides to pull back from the current military position and engage in peaceful negotiations. Why Russia's current military plan is inimical to Russia in many facets? The Western thought on Russia's earlier invasion and annexation of Crimea from Ukraine's eastern peninsula in 2014 is the result of NATO further expansion in the region. However, Russia's explanation on Crimea is arguably otherwise. Russia citing Russian speaking citizens in Crimea fleeing their hometown due to unrest erupting from Western authorized violence in Maidan Square and subsequent government removal in Kiev in 2014 led to the pro Russian separatist movement that are still prevalent in the eastern Donbass region in Ukraine. The majority Russian speaking Crimean population then seeking the territory union with Russian Federation in the local referendum led to the annexation. In fact, on 11 April 2014, the Parliament of Crimea approved a new constitution with 88 out of 100 lawmakers voting in favor of its adoption. The new constitution confirms the Republic of Crimea as a democratic state within the Russian Federation and declares both territories united and inseparable. End quote. Regardless, the Western stance is Russia's aggressive takeover of Crimea is unacceptable, and accordingly, Crimea not recognized as Russia's territory by the West until now. The truth lies somewhere in between on both sides of the argument. There is no doubt that NATO building in Eastern Europe, reaching Russia's nearest territorial border, that is Ukraine, becoming the Western target in 2014 and thereafter is the fundamental cause of the present crisis. The Western involved insurrection in 2014 continued with hostile overthrow of democratically elected then incumbent government of President Viktor Yanukovych, fleeing for life and sought political refuge in Russia. The anti democratic event held on Global Watch in 2014. The intensive Western influence and installation of Ukrainian government, not barring neo-Nazi representation, post-Western insurrection launched in Kiev in 2014 fomented internal economic and political strife for Ukrainians paying the price till date. The ground reality in Ukraine in 2014 paved the way for Russia to seize opportunity to annex Crimea, undeniably the key strategic location for Russian naval base in the Black Sea. The Crimean Republic joining the Russian Federation might have been a major windfall for Russian defense strategy. Nevertheless, the territorial gain has not been without consequences for Russia. The Western perspective on Crimea remains the compelling factor to increase NATO alliance against Russia, with Ukraine as the rolling dice to perform to Western demand, on the other hand, proved counterproductive so far. Additionally, the Western NATO extension also largely connected to the past with former nuclear Soviet Union sprawling authority over entire Eastern Europe, including the Balkan states and Central Asia. Not to mention the liberation of East Germany with the removal of Berlin Wall that separated the German territory from then West Germany, not in a distant memory, serve as the reminder in preventing history from repeating itself again. The ex Soviet Union quest for territorial conquest was not limited to Central and Eastern Europe at that time. The desire to acquire more power and landmass misled the former Soviet Union to invade and occupy Afghanistan, having centralized power in that part of the world, that is Central Asia, comprising Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan, were annexed as the independent republics under Soviet Central Command and economy. The Soviet adventure in Afghanistan was catastrophic, to say the least, for the occupied Afghans as well as the occupier, Soviet Union, that is USSR, known at that time, with United States and Afghan Mujahideen led battle resulting in Soviet withdrawal from Afghan soil. Anything too big to control and manage eventually disintegrates with severe impact on the origin. And in this instance, Russia and Russians suffered significant economic, political, and military setbacks that were inevitable. Once Soviet Union was debilitated in Afghan war, the house of cards crumbling on the Soviet Empire followed sequentially with no option but to accept the reality, that is, Russia returning to home base to get the house in order that was in disarray in semblance with contemporary situation. There is a serious and important lesson to learn for Russian political leaderships from Russian history in the 20th and 21st century. The equivalent of present dynamics in Western and Russian stalemate regarding Ukraine is 1991 Kuwait invasion by then Iraq President Saddam Hussein. The miscalculated error from then Iraqi President Saddam Hussein failed to recognize the Kuwait trail was nothing more than a bait or decoy that trapped the once United States ally, Iraqi President Saddam Hussein, into wanton invasion of Kuwait. Little knowing that Iraqi President Saddam Hussein's grave mistake set the track for the United States neoconservatives and Zionist hawkish strategies to utilize that Iraqi invasion of Kuwait against Iraq later in 2003. The United States and NATO attack on Iraq in 2003, implementing the premeditated and long anticipated Project for New American Century with the acronym PNAC, Iraq, among several crucial Middle Eastern, North African, and Central Asian nations such as Afghanistan on the card for the US and NATO brutal aggression witnessed worldwide. The United States and NATO warfare in these regions are yet to cease, with direct and indirect weapon supply and logistic support delivered to nations in perpetual conflict, such as to Saudi Arabia against Yemen and other factions in Libya, Syria, Lebanon, and other groups engaged in constant, perpetual confrontation. The history is testament in this regard. All said and done, the irrefutable fact is Russia's contribution in the world stage in maintaining the balance of power in 20th century in World War I and World War II is praiseworthy. Russia is a powerful nation with tremendous experience in glory and upheavals throughout history. The Russian power is best enhanced in establishing democracy at home and alongside peace and unity with neighbors like Ukraine and the rest of Eastern Europe as well as Central Asia. Russia's commitment to sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity in the region and outside, exemplified in permanent peace deal with Ukraine, would preempt solidarity and renew normal ties with the neighbor across the border. The idea of invasion and conquering nations near and far in the hope of revival of former empire status is obsolete. and critically excruciating failure known up until now. The imperial and colonial quest drained the domestic economy, with skyrocketing sovereign debt burdened on every man, woman, and child, including the ones yet to be born in the world. The United States is a classic example in this context. The invasion and occupation of foreign land in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other parts of the world, costing American taxpayers in trillions, and the war veterans ending as homeless, dwelling under the bridge and downtown areas in major American cities is heart-wrenching sight. Similarly, the nations under attack and occupied by major powers exhibiting military might and exhausting defense stockpiles are rendered refugees in their homeland. The population in these war torn nations are denied access to basic survival at home and neither accepted as political refugees in the aggressor's land. The world has seen these events far too many times and still ongoing in many regions, predominantly due to the misguided superpower glamour, equipped with nuclear status, rejecting the adverse ramifications of such indulgence. Russia's current position, as publicly clarified by the political leadership ruling out invasion of Ukraine, is welcome. The statement delivered in action by pulling the Russian troops back from Ukrainian boundary all around would be credible. The Russian positive steps in this respect would build reliable trust among citizens in Ukraine and international community alike. Instead, the Russian political decision to surround Ukraine militarily as negotiation tool with the West on NATO incursion against Russia is basically aggravating the problem rather than resolving the issue. The actions always verify the intent than words in all matter. Now, the United States, European Union, the European Commission, in particular, as the Western Front, are in requirement to tone down the rhetoric on anti Russian information fueling the dilemma. The Western conditions and rules of engagement with a nuclear Russia seated at the UN Security Council as a permanent member with veto power deserve careful approach and respectful exchange, synonymous to vice versa expectations by the West from Russia. The Western policy using NATO to leverage against Russia upon being replicated by the latter through military armament against Ukraine is arguably not appreciated. The nation, right at the center and primary victim in the entire Western power versus Russian disagreement, is Ukraine. The Western and Russian equation comprising Ukraine as the constant factor would invariably yield negative results to both sides that are obviously beneficial to none, especially Ukraine held hostage in the crisis. The European Commission public offer on economic package to Ukraine to the tune of 2 billion euros in 3 installments, with a first one in the amount 1.2 billion euro, followed by 600 million euros in the second and 200 million euros as the third installment payment, could be very enticing for any economically struggling nation. Unfortunately, the economic bargain on sovereignty of a nation in the present time appears to have been reduced to mere 2 billion or so in price tag. The economic incentive from European Commission upon being extended to Ukraine as unconditional monetary aid, that is, no obligation on Ukraine's part to join NATO, considering that is one of the issue for Russia in the national security concern, the economic deal would be more appropriate. Alternatively, European Commission or European Union returning the illegal funds held in tax shelters in Europe, the money transferred from corruption deals in Ukraine among oligarchy and other members within and outside Ukraine, depriving Ukraine citizens the economic development in the country would be equitable. Either way, the EU, that is the European Union through European Commission, providing economic assistance without any pressure or coercion on Ukraine to compromise national sovereignty by not having to be a NATO ally or submit to Western geopolitical goals would be honorable. Ukraine, spared from traditional divide and conquer strategy, familiar in the imperial past and present, would be a new chapter in the era. The financial relief to the battered Ukrainian economy, primarily due to foreign intrusions and corruption in domestic system, is imperative more than anything else. Russia and Ukraine working together in reconciling differences and mitigate the military interventions from all sides, beginning with Russian forces' retreat and NATO confinement away from Russia and neighboring territory, is the path to peaceful settlement in the current stalemate in Eastern Europe. The peaceful resolution of Ukraine crisis is in the best interest of all parties, and above all, the regional stability anywhere in the world is tied to global peace and security. The overzealous and capricious policy on international affairs has been unfavorable and perpetuated the impasse. Hence, all parties are urged to prioritize human lives, economic cost, sovereignty, self-determination of nations, and territorial integrity in mutual respect and recognition of individual nations, regional and world peace. That brings this topic to conclusion. Your attention and interest much appreciated. I am Padmini Arhant, author and presenter, padminiarhant.com, prakriti.padminiarhant.com, representative to the divinity. Thank you.